Welcome to the Widowed Mom Podcast, episode 332, Intent versus Impact in Widowhood.
Welcome to the Widowed Mom Podcast, the only podcast that offers a proven process to help you work through your grief, to grow, evolve, and create a future you can truly look forward to. Here's your host, Master Certified Life Coach, Grief Expert, Widow, and Mom, Krista St-Germain.
Hey there, welcome to another episode of the podcast. How are you doing? It's October by the time you are listening to this. I'm recording it at the end of September, but by the time you hear it, it will be October. It's starting to feel more like fall. The weather's, I think, going to cool off a little bit more. It's actually been really nice, so I cannot complain at all. I just finished a master's retreat with my Mom Goes On master's members, and the impetus for this podcast episode actually came about in that retreat. First of all, I love retreats. They're like my favorite thing to do. Well, that's not true. They're one of my favorite things to do, but it's really fun to guide people through an experience and spend time with people who are interested in the kind of work that I do and want to love life and those kinds of things. So I already love the retreat, but it came up as we were exploring rules that we had picked up, specifically in childhood, growing up, right? Rules that we had picked up along the road of life. And one of my clients noticed a rule that she had kind of inherited from her parents. And she noticed how that rule was still kind of holding her back in terms of the way that she wanted to express herself. And so that rule was something about, it's important to be agreeable. And she knew she learned that from her parents. And then she could kind of see how she was still holding on to that rule. And she didn't really want to hold on to that rule anymore because there were times when she was editing herself, censoring herself, and she didn't really want to do that so much. But then later, as she thought about it, she started to feel guilty because she didn't believe her parents meant any harm by that rule. She was grateful for her upbringing, and she just felt a little conflicted about it. And so the next day when she was telling me that, we talked about intent versus impact. And then another woman in the retreat said, "Is there a podcast episode on that yet?" And I realized, no, there actually isn't a podcast episode on that. So that is the reason that this came to my mind. So you know who you are, lovely Mom Goes On Masters members. So thank you for that conversation. And I hope this helps other people who weren't in that retreat. So intent versus impact. Let's break it down. Intent is what someone meant, what they intended, their intention. Impact is how we received it, how it landed. And so we can have an entirely different intent than an impact. We can intend one thing and it will land in a completely different way. We can mean well, or someone else can mean well. Their intent can be loving or protective or supportive, but the impact of their choices can still be painful or confusing or hurtful. And this happens a lot in life generally, but it also really happens in grief and in widowhood. So I want to give you some examples, and maybe you'll see where you might have noticed that someone's intent was different than their impact. So let's say a friend tells you, "Oh my gosh, you're so strong. I could never imagine being as strong as you are." And their intent, perhaps, is to compliment you, to make you feel better, not to hurt you. But the impact of those words might feel more like pressure to you, that you have to hide the truth of your experience and how you're really feeling. Or the impact might feel like you were just minimized because, yes, while you are getting through the to-dos of the day and you're back to functioning, you don't feel great. You don't feel strong, right? How they are complimenting you is different than your experience. So their intent was to compliment, and the impact was not received as a compliment. Maybe someone tells you something, and there's so many of these cliches. I know you know them by now, but maybe they say something like, oh, he's not suffering anymore. At least he's not suffering anymore. He's in a better place. Something along those lines. And again, their intent is to comfort you. They see you experiencing grief, and they have the reflex to right that perceived wrong, which, by the way, grief is not wrong at all. But, their intention, as they would tell you, is to comfort you. But their impact might be a lot more minimizing. You might receive that in a way that says, yeah, but, okay, yeah, I'm also glad they're not suffering anymore. And also, this is really hard for me. And also, I still wish they were here. And also, right? Maybe you grew up with some specific rules that, like my client, your parent taught you because they were intending to teach you what they felt was important. Maybe your mother taught you that a good mother sacrifices everything for her kids. And her intent was to instill something which she felt was very important, like selflessness, right? But if we're still living by that rule, then the impact could be that we don't actually prioritize ourselves. There's really not a lot of room for our own joy and our own dreams and our own healing and our own needs, because we're following a well-intended parent's rule that a good mother sacrifices everything for her kids. So the intent wasn't to cause harm, but yet it can be the cause of harm, right? The impact can actually cause harm. Think about how we might do this as parents when we are widowed and we are parenting, right? Sometimes, because our intention is to protect our kids from more pain, they've already been through so much, we might be a little lenient in our parenting. We might avoid hard conversations. We might give them more than we really think they should have because we don't want to say no, because our intention is to not cause more pain. And the unanticipated, undesirable impact could be that our children then learn not to share their grief openly. Maybe our children learn they aren't given the opportunity to be as resilient as they could be. They don't learn to hear no. They don't have someone parenting them with firm boundaries who says something and then follows through on it. But our intention wasn't to cause harm. Maybe we overcompensate to make life easier for them, again, with the intention of helping. But the impact could be that for us, now we're more stressed. We're exhausted. And maybe even that confuses our kids because we tell them the expectation is one thing, and then we decide to jump in and do it for them, and now they don't really know what the expectations actually are. You might have also noticed this with your late spouse or your person. Happens a lot with suicide loss, right? Not that we know the intention behind our partner's death by suicide. We don't. But it is possible that they didn't consciously intend to hurt us at all, that it was the way out of pain and suffering that they saw. In fact, they may have seen that death by suicide was the solution to some of our pain. We don't really know. But the impact of that choice is probably not what they intended. And the impact is undeniable. It is important. It deserves attention. And sometimes what happens is that because we get these things conflated and we assume that, well, I shouldn't feel this way that I feel because I don't believe they intended to cause me harm. So I minimize the harm that I feel because I somehow believe that the harm I experienced doesn't line up with their intent and then is somehow less valid. Do you see how that works or how it can work? Can also, I see this sometimes with the conversations that didn't happen before our person died. So maybe the intent from our person was that they wanted to stay positive and that they were afraid that if they talked like they weren't going to survive a diagnosis, that maybe, somehow that would actually bring that to pass. Maybe they thought it would be too stressful on us to have that conversation, and so they just kept putting it off. Maybe they never organized paperwork that we really wish they would have organized, and they didn't have an intention to cause us harm or hurt us. But there is a very valid impact to that choice. So the intent is separate from the impact. And when we can separate those two things, it gets a lot easier to deal with. And we don't have to be gaslighting ourselves. We don't have to be telling ourselves, well, they meant well, so I shouldn't feel this way. Right? We can acknowledge and honor what we think their intention was and still name the real and important impact that we are experiencing. Which could look like, well, I don't know exactly what they meant. I think they meant well, and I still feel hurt. It doesn't have to be either or. We don't have to believe that they meant to hurt us in order to validate our hurt. We don't have to feel guilty about feeling hurt because we believe that they meant well. We can notice both. Both can exist. There can be the intent, and that can be very different from the impact. Now, to those of you who are listening to me and you have coached with me and you know I teach the self-coaching model, the thought model, yes, okay, what they did is still the neutral circumstance in our model. And yes, how we received it is not going to be the same for every person because we're all different. So how we receive something is an internal experience. And it's valid. And it's valid. I noticed this a lot for me personally, and this is kind of where I started, I think, maybe thinking about it a little bit more. It's just with this most recent breakup that I went through. I say most recent as though I've had a lot of them. The only breakup I've had since Hugo died, but since going through that, I did a lot of questioning myself of my own impact and getting it confused, right? Not that I really know what his intention was, but I found myself trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. And in doing so, noticed myself minimizing my own impact, minimizing the impact of his choices. And the impact was pretty real, y'all. My nervous system, my ability to trust, just so many things in logistically in my world, emotionally in my world, is a very real impact, a lot of hurt, a lot of anger, a lot of betrayal. And that's the last thing I want myself or any of us doing, is deciding that how we have been impacted by something, how we feel about something, is somehow not valid because we don't believe the person meant it to be that way. Both can be true. Now, I don't know for this situation. I don't know. But it doesn't matter, because what needs caring or what needs cared for is the impact. For me, that's my work. That's your work. It's to care for the impact of whatever it is. It's not about blaming. It's not about shaming. It's not about right, wrong, good, bad. This is how it impacted me. And so I need to take care of myself in that. I need to decide who I want to be in that. I need to decide how I want to treat myself in that. So I want you to pause and reflect on this in your own life. Where have you been minimizing your own experience because you believed someone meant well? And how would it feel to validate both the impact and the intent instead of choosing one over the other? What if both can be true? You don't have to erase the impact of something just because the intent was loving. And if you're doing that, I just want to offer that you consider this, that you might find some freedom on the other side of this idea if you implement it. It becomes a lot easier to take care of yourself in your own experience because it really doesn't have to have anything to do with how somebody intended. Okay? Before I go, if you have not yet subscribed to the podcast, if you haven't rated it, if you haven't reviewed it, I would love for you to do any of those things. It really is what helps other widows find this support. Also, go to coachingwithkrista.com if you are interested in learning more and fill out the free grief stage assessment. And once you do that, it's very quick. It only takes a couple of minutes. You will get a free training. It will be specific to what you are struggling with in grief. And in that training, you will learn some very helpful things, which I wish someone had taught me. And you will also learn what it is like and how you can work with me in the containers that I have if you are interested and that feels good to you. Okay? You can find everything at coachingwithkrista.com. It's right there on the main page. All right. Intent versus impact. That is what I have for you this week. Remember, I love you. You've got this. Take care, and I'll see you next week. If you like what you've been hearing on this podcast and want to create a future you can truly get excited about even after the loss of your spouse, I invite you to join my Mom Goes On coaching program. It's small group coaching just for widowed moms like you, where I'll help you figure out what's holding you back and give you the tools and support you need so you can move forward with confidence. Please don't settle for a new normal that's less than what you deserve. Go to coachingwithkrista.com and click Work With Me for details and next steps. I can't wait to meet you.